Hello friends, and welcome back to Ask Abby Dreyer. This week, I want to talk about having that difficult conversation with someone who crossed your boundaries, hurt your feelings, made you upset in some way. And a lot of times what we run into when we try to hold someone else accountable for how we feel, the person gets defensive, either because they absolutely did it and you weren't supposed to catch them in it, or they really didn't mean it and they didn't want you to take it that way, and now they think that they're a horrible person because they did something that made you upset. So I want to make sure that when we have these conversations that we are true to ourselves and our boundaries, but also owning our feelings a little bit, but also telling the other person that what they did wasn't acceptable to us. So there's a delicate balance for how to do that, and that's what I want to talk about today. So the first thing is, when you hold someone accountable for crossing your boundaries, the first thing that you need to do is make sure that they knew that was your boundary. So sometimes we're quiet and we have our own reasons for that, but if we don't tell someone that they've crossed a boundary and they continue to do it, at some point it's not their fault. It's our fault for not expressing what our boundaries are and saying, you know what, this isn't cool. And then if they continue to do it, then it's on them. The other thing is, when our boundaries are crossed, we get angry, we get sad, we get all kinds of emotions that are not conducive to a healthy and happy conversation. So again, owning our own emotions about something, maybe take a minute and, say, you know what, I need a second. Or maybe come back later and say, that thing you did before, this is how it made me feel. This is why it's unacceptable to me. Can you not do that again? Right? So sometimes we think a boundary's been crossed, but maybe we misunderstood the context and it actually didn't cross a boundary now that we have a better understanding of what the intention was. And then, cool, thank you for clarifying that. They should still apologize. And you have to give them space to apologize. But again, we see a lot of things around now that intent doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't cross your boundaries. Somebody may have said something that really made you angry, but they didn't intend to make you angry. You still got angry. It still hurt you in some way. And they need to own that something that they said was not perceived the way they wanted it to be perceived. There's a little bit of work that needs to happen on both sides. But again, have the conversation. Be clear about what it was that made you upset or crossed your boundary, what you would prefer that they do in the future, and see if there's space for apologies and forgiveness. If there's no apology, it's up to you whether or not you forgive. It's also up to you whether or not you give them another opportunity to cross your boundaries again. If they are unrepentant about it, then you don't need to open yourself up to that anymore. And then you can start to talk about start to think about how you can separate yourself from that person so that they don't continue to cross your boundaries. Maybe once those consequences are clear, maybe they'll try to do better next time. That's the hope, right? But again, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Do you call them back or do you cut them off? You get to decide who you spend your time with. And if there's a person who is unrepentant about crossing your boundaries, or apologizes and then does it again, and then apologizes and does it again, and apologizes and does it again, you don't need that. You don't have to put up with that. And as long as you're clear to yourself about why you are cutting that person out or standing up and saying this is wrong, then that's all you need to do. The other person needs to own how they respond to you pushing back or pulling away. You all have your own role in this particular adventure. So that's really what I wanted to kind of talk about today, is making sure that you know your own boundaries, you express your boundaries clearly, and you hold space for people who accidentally cross your boundaries. Give them an opportunity to apologize and then decide whether or not to forgive. And then if they don't apologize, decide what's going to happen next. I think that's really all there is to these conversations. It's easier said than done. A lot of times these conversations get really emotional and heated, and that's why I think it's important to take some time for yourself to truly understand your feelings about it. And then hopefully the conversation goes well. And if it doesn't, then hopefully you don't have to converse with them very often. And so yeah, tell me in the comments about a time that you had a really good conversation when someone crossed your boundary and you talked about it and they suddenly understood where you were coming from and everything was great. And maybe share a story about a time that you crossed a boundary and realized that this is not a person you need in your life. I'd love to hear both those stories, so feel free to leave them in the comments. And with that, we'll see you next week.